What's good, everybody? It's your boy Big Nate. Welcome back to Big Nate's Book Reviews, home of the best book reviews. And today we have a dope ass video, one of my favorite ones to do of all time. And this is where we go through every single book that I read this year in the year of our Lord 2025. So of course I've got my little accoutrements, and of course here are all the books I read in 2025, excluding those top two because those are ones I'm currently reading, which I wanted to talk about at the end of the video. So at the end of the day, I read 15 books this year, which as a supposed booktuber is not all that much. However, we're gonna get into all that, but before we do, do you guys smell it in the air? We got something to do before we get into all that, and of course that is a doobie. So without further ado, we are smoking this one for, for one, all the Big Nate gang, all the Big Nate subscribers. I think this is our 4th or 5th yearly review, so we smoking this for you, as well as for all the authors that we are going to discuss here. As always, we are smoking this in proportion to how good they are, because we are doing a tier ranking list. I didn't even mention that. It's gonna be dope, a yearly tradition, and without further ado, let's get right into it. Okay, so first I wanna speak on what to me, in some sense is the fact that I read a pitifully little amount of books this year. And I'm gonna show you just real quick. I think this right here might have something to do with it. These were 3. War and Peace, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, and Moby Dick, which this one's kind of a question mark. This one took me, I mentioned this one as kind of like being a time suck because the middle was just so excruciatingly boring. It was just like pulling nails. But Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, I think it's like 1150, 1200, and War and Peace is also looking like 1200 as well. So combined, I feel like these make what's 12 divided by what's the average? 300, let's say 300. That's like 4 books. So I would say this is something like 8 books. And of course, I don't actually need to justify this in the first place. Like, reading is a very individual kind of activity that you do with yourself. You don't do it to put up stats. You don't do it to put up numbers. It's for your own individual growth. Because I didn't read that many books, but I feel like the books I did read, I read deeply, and they were also, again, all these mofos. I was literally reading, for instance, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich for a full year, from sometime in January to equivalently in December. So this book took me nearly 365 days to read, but I feel like I am so much better off for it. And I don't remember the exact dates, but I imagine it was also probably close to a year that it took me to read War and Peace. These two were the books I was reading for a very long time, just side by side. Honestly, quite the combo. In terms of just its pure length, that's some real dense shit right there, but also these go hand in hand in terms of the philosophy of history. And on top of that, I've also been going back to school at least half time, 3/4 time, and that's been honestly a massive time suck. Work full time, it's just reading this, and again, this is how, when you have reading as a lifelong habit, there are ups and there are downs, and I'm hoping in fact 2026 will be an up. And it's not even that I feel like 2025 was a bad year of reading for me necessarily, but I do feel like just in general I did kind of read less this year. But anyway, I'm nevertheless excited to talk about everything I did read, because this year did have some absolute bangers. So with the snap of my finger, we are gonna switch up the screen and go to the tier ranking. We'll go through each level, and then we will rate my modest, puny 15 books that I read in 2025. Let's get right to it. Okay, and since we were already talking about them, let me at least just pull out one. We're gonna start off extremely strong here with War and Peace. So okay, actually hold on. First, let me describe the tier levels real quick. S is a top book this year. So it's not necessarily this is an S tier book for me, period, but relative to this year. And then A is just, this is a great ass book. It's not quite on that, it's not like the top creme de la creme, but fantastic. You should read it, tons of bangers. B is just, it's a good book. I'm glad I read it, but it didn't particularly scream out to me in one way or the other. But it's a good book. For C, we got low-key mid. And honestly, if you guys have watched this, we rarely put anything in the C or D because I will just straight DNF that shit. So C is low-key mid. I already know, I think, a book that's gonna go here, but we're gonna leave it as is. And then the D tier is just straight ass. So, but as I was saying, let's go ahead and select War and Peace, which of course has to be one of the top books this year. And I made that distinction about the S tier overall versus this year because I honestly, and this might be a hot take, but War and Peace to me is more like A tier. It's good, but Honor Karenina for me is S tier, War and Peace for me is A tier. But then again, on the other hand, War and Peace is truly, I think at times, and for even most of the book, is has some S tier moments. So that's honestly like an 8.5 just in general. But for now, I'll put this as definitely a top book of the year. If I had to describe the plot of War and Peace, it's honestly, to me, kind of similar to Anna Karenina, where basically we just follow this whole kind of like cast of different characters. And they definitely have different themes. Like Anna Karenina is more like love and personal relationships and existentialism philosophy, whereas War and Peace is very much like the philosophy of history and this idea of like military science. And at the end of the day, really it's just interactions of a bunch of individual human wills. Like he has this caricature of just history and military in general, where all these generals, they spend hours and hours working up this elaborate plan for how to deal with the enemy. They're going to come from the left flank and then the ambush and then boom, all right, they have these super elaborate tactics. And he says, and by the way, Tolstoy actually fought in the war. I don't know if he was like really with it like that, but I think he was enough to accurately portray what's happening here. Which is like, once a battle takes place, the whole thing just falls to shit, and it is just this random, chaotic movement of just like horrific death, though. That's the thing. He will go in and give these really, I feel like, it's like realistic and therefore brutal descriptions of some of the things. Like it's not pretty. Like you can romanticize it and stuff like that, but like amputated limbs and bullet wounds and this, that, and the other. But also, I will say the kind of like it's kind of like the Iliad in that way. Dude, I gotta take a breath. That was crazy. I was just fucking yapping. Simply what I'm trying to say is that War and Peace, like the Iliad, shows both the brutal and also like the valor, brave, excitement. That's one thing that I feel like he captures really well. There is a sort of like giddy, pleasurable excitement about going to war, and especially if you go out in them trenches and you're boom, blam and shit, and you come back alive to live the tale, like you are him, and you got that. It's probably like they describe it almost as like an ecstatic feeling. And that's not to mention the character work. Like I feel like Pierre, Prince Andre, like just the whole list of them. And like War and Peace, in fact, is known for having like couple hundred, I think it's over 200 characters introduced throughout the story. And on top of that, he depicts Napoleon, as well as just the whole progression of one of the most like major world events in Russian history. And of course, it's the writing itself for me. I don't know what it is, but the way he's able to just get these like little insights about life and characters and psychology and just, again, the nature of history and free will. It's a very, you know, I see why this is considered one of the greats, absolutely. So I do feel like more so than Anna Karenina, to me, this one kind of like has moments where it can kind of drag for a while. Like I would have, you know, maybe one more edit, Tolstoy, just one more edit, boom. Then War and Peace, you know, it's got it all there, but it's got a little extra fluff. So for me, I'm going to put it, I mean, still at a top book this year, but to justify my earlier criticisms of it. Anyway, let's go ahead and select just a random book. How about Modern Man in Search of a Soul by Carl Jung? And for me, I honestly feel like I gotta also put this in a top book of the year. It's basically a bunch of essays by Carl Jung. In fact, I got it right here. Dream Analysis and Practical Application, Problems of Modern Psychotherapy, Aims of Psychotherapy, A Psychological Theory of Types. In fact, I think that's where he comes up with the introverted, extroverted, which like that's an actual thing used in like personality psychology, and that comes directly from Jung. He came up with that. The Stages of Life, Freud and Jung Contrast, Archaic Man, Psychology and Literature, The Basic Postulates of Analytic Psychology, The Spiritual Problem of Man, and Psychotherapists or the Clergy. Damn, it's been a while since I went through it. What a, you know, just a banger list of chapter names. And at the same time, Jung to me is just a genuinely good and literary author who in this book, I feel like especially describes the principles of psychoanalysis, specifically with regard to dreams and the fact that dreams are actually symbolic meanings that come from the unconscious. He talks about the, you know, what even is the unconscious, everything you want to know and more. I mean, I'm not going to say all that, but Modern Man in Search of a Soul was a banger book by Carl Jung. So for that reason, I think I'm gonna have to put it in the S tier. So there we go. All right, let's see what's up next. Let's do The History of Mathematics by, I forget what it is. Something Burton. I want to say it's David Burton. And this was just a full-blown textbook. I'm going to put this as it is a good book because I loved the descriptions of like the ancient Greek, ancient Roman, ancient Egyptian, all the different historical places in which mathematics popped up, which was truly, you know, all around the world. I think partly at different times, but just hearing the legends and the lore. I forget who it was, but there was some ancient Greek dude who was like trying to figure out the height of the pyramids, and he did so by like at noon placing his staff and looking at the angle between the staff and like the shadow of it, and from that he extrapolated like from the width of the pyramid, how tall it was, and everyone was like amazed, and it was like this whole thing. And then there's someone like Archimedes who comes up with like these crazy catapult like death machines for when his hometown of Syracuse was being invaded, but that's a whole thing. He's the one who famously said eureka when he like his students finally made him take a bath, and when he did, he realized like this thing with water displacement, which helped find out about like a metal alloy. Anyway, he said eureka, and he ran around legend has it he ran around the town stark naked just to go write it down. And one last thing, like this is the thing that's always stuck out to me about Archimedes, is he said like, give me a point and a fulcrum and I can move anything in this world. And there's a legend where like there was this giant ship that whatever the king built, and they were trying to figure out how to get it into the water, and Archimedes apparently set up this whole like pulley system so that apparently, as it's reported from a very far distance away, he was able to like simply lift his finger, which set off this chain reaction in which moved the boat. And I'm pretty sure that's low-key like historically confirmed. So Archimedes, and that's just one that I named. There's honestly so many interesting ones, and for that reason I really fuck with this book. But what I did not like, unironically, was the mathematics in it, because like half the book was history and the other half, like in each chapter you'd have to do math problems related to that. Honestly, as I say this out loud, that actually sounds like a perfect setup for a textbook, but for me, I found that shit boring. I mean, yeah, I get it. In fact, I'm just gonna say I'm wrong on this, but it is Big Nate's tier ranking list, so for me, it's a good book. All right, up next, let's go ahead and do, how about Notes from Underground by Fyodor Dostoevsky. So it's between it's a good book and a great ass book. Like at its best, I feel like this has a lot of interesting themes to chew on: the existentialism, the modern man, the character dynamic of like, for one, the character study of the underground man, but also the way in which he interacts with, I forget her name, Lisa or Eliza, I think it's Lisa or something like that. Honestly, this book is most interesting to me from like a psychological point of view of the underground man. And it might just be because I book clubbed this with a couple of homies. Shout out Julian, shout out Ben. No shout out to Noah. No attendance. Bro was straight absent. Don't have him fool you. But I feel like Dostoevsky's writing, even though yes, it is rough around the edges at times, I feel like the philosophy and the story behind this is actually just genuinely, you know, makes for a great ass book. And I am excited to talk about this more during the full review. But in the meantime, let's go ahead and go to our next book. Let's do Strength to Love by Martin Luther King Jr. Instantly, I want to put it at a great ass book. I'll think about it for a second, but that feels right to me. And like anyone who follows me on GOODREADS will know, the thing about this book, Strength to Love, is that it's not really political or racial or like social justice. I mean, that's definitely in there, but more than anything, this is a book about spiritual development, psychological growth. He talks even about, it's basically a psychoanalysis of like the American society during the Jim Crow era. And I say psychoanalysis very deliberately because he mentions Carl Jung in this, Nietzsche, but he's also on his pastor kind of grind, because this book is also very much, you would have to say undeniably, this is a Christian book. This is when Preacher Martin comes out and he starts preaching the gospel, but also in terms of like spiritual development, but again, also throughout the whole thing is peppered with social justice, racial justice, and just, you know, all the good stuff that MLK usually talks about. In some way, this is kind of like the essential MLK Jr., because Trumpet of Conscience was very much straight political, social, racial, whereas this, like I've been saying, is more on his spiritual shit. So I'm gonna put it as a great ass book. You can disagree with me, but that would be wrong according to the Big Nate tier list. So let's see, up next, what do we got? Let's do The Trial by Franz Kafka. All right, this to me, I'm gonna say it is a great ass book. You can, again, you are welcome to disagree, but I feel like the balance of surrealism in this book, which I just mentioned, I'm pretty sure was a rough draft. Like I think he died before he was able to. No, it most certainly is a rough draft. And even still, the scenes in this that are just so downright eerie and uncanny. I feel like this in The Trial has this masterclass of the idea of surrealism. And I so wish I could have seen Kafka with all his short stories too. I think some of them are finished, but largely unpolished. I would have loved for him, because he died at like 40 of tuberculosis too, which is like a totally curable disease. I also book clubbed this. Shout out Ben, shout out Julian. Again, where was Noah? That's kind of weird. I feel like, yeah, he was definitely absent, huh? But all right, I guess we can just get to the next book, which will be Pedro Paramo by Juan Rulfo. So I'm gonna put this as, at times it's a great ass book, but also for a lot of it I really was just kind of genuinely confused, like what's going on, and the scene is kind of like repetitive. I kind of wanted more substance to the actual story itself, but in terms of just raw vibe, I thought it was great. Also, again, with that surrealism, or perhaps better put, actually, like that Latin American magical realism. And like there's this village where there are these people, we don't know if they're real or if they're spirits, maybe it's a little bit of both, and it's just like this very short, terse, vibe based book, which I personally quite enjoyed. So I'm tempted to put it out as a great ass book, but let me be a little judicious, because like I said, I do feel like this story was lacking a little bit of meat to its bones, and maybe I just need a reread, but that's, I feel like this is good. Verging on, let me get a reread, but for now I'm gonna say it's a good book. Okay, up next, let's do Concerning the Spirituality in Art by Vasily Kandinsky. You are probably familiar with some of his paintings. If not, well, you're about to be. I got them hung up at various places throughout my house. I think they're pretty cool. So I saw this book concerning the spiritual in art, which is like his philosophy of art and spirituality. So I thought, of course, I had to put that up. And really, it's kind of like an essay, like it's a really short little thing. But I thought, while it does have some very interesting bangers where he talks about the nature of art that is like color and form and shape, and especially because he's like abstract, there's a lot of parallels you can make with personality and psychology and spirituality. Like that's, Carl Jung does a whole thing on the modern abstract art as it relates to the milieu of history and society. But while there was a lot of interesting bangers in this book, overall, I'm just gonna put it as good. It didn't like particularly wow me. I got some good stuff out of it, that's for sure, but I feel like that seems like let's put it at, it's a good book. I think that's a good place for that one right there. Okay, up next, let's just get it out the way. Moby Dick. It's so tough because this book literally is a combination of here, top book of the year, in here, straight ass. When this book is actually telling a story, the story of Moby Dick, it is the top book of the year. The characters like Ishmael and of course Queequeg, particularly in the beginning of the book, that's the thing. Queequeg just almost totally, completely disappears after it seems like he was gonna be like a main character. But nevertheless, I really enjoyed that part, and we got to know more characters like Starbuck and Stubb and Flask and of course Captain Ahab, and they're after Moby Dick, and there's all this like Gnostic, mystical aspect to this, this white whale, this almost like seemingly supernatural deity. So all of that stuff was fantastic. Top book of the year. I would love Moby Dick, but the whole middle part to me, and it's got to be like, I gotta say, if I had to seriously bet money, I feel like 200 pages of just straight whale miscellanea, encyclopedic, just listing totally uninteresting, what to me was uninteresting, boring whale facts. And yeah, at times he could do it kind of like in an interesting way, and he has like this chapter on the color white, which was like actually really fascinating. And again, that's because it started touching that mystical territory. But most of this is just the most mundane, boring facts about whales, like about the head, about the skin, and how it's typically prepared, and just like what feels like, not exaggeration, hundreds of just useless whale facts. Like this is the one book to me which I was like, I would love to read this and should be read abridged. I know I'm gonna get some hate for that because I've already seen some people trying to cope and say why they actually loved that part. And the thing is, it seems like they genuinely do. It seems like there's so many people that just really get a kick out of that, and for the life of me I cannot understand it. Like it got to a point where I would have DNF'd this so fast, but like I had faith, and I knew that, okay, this has to be a classic for a reason, and so far it has not showed me it. So it must be like the end part, and in my opinion, like the last probably couple hundred pages, something like that, it does pick up, and we get to see, again, it gets back to the actual fucking story with Captain Ahab and Moby Dick and Ishmael and his observations. And so for this reason, I don't know, it's tough. It's funny because when in the middle of it, I was like, there is no way I will ever give this more than like 2.5 to 3 stars, because this is just so insanely like tedious and long. Like it's just, I'm sorry, it just totally distracts from the story. I was like, it's not getting anything more than like a C. But honestly, the end was so good, and the story, the way it all wrapped up, I feel like I gotta say this is a great ass book. So, and that's saying something, because there was a valley of shadow of death for a little bit there, but anyhow, that's Moby Dick, and I know people have contrasting opinions, so let's hear them in the comments. But up next, let's go ahead and do Martyr by Kaveh Akbar. And I'm torn between like it's a good book and also low key mid. You know, it's one of like it's been hot, it's been trending kind of contemporary book. And while there is a lot of interesting stuff here, like we get Rumi, we get kind of like this Iranian American perspective as an immigrant, and it also is very modern. Some people like that. You know, there's a lot you can kind of like relate to. But basically, he's like depressed, alcoholic, addicted to drugs, and one day has this kind of like little experience that just makes him go sober. And now he's kind of in the wake of that, and he becomes very interested in poetry and this idea of martyrdom. Like, what does it mean to die for something, and what about meaningless deaths? Because it's not a spoiler, I wouldn't say, but I'll just say someone important in his life basically died what ended up just being a statistic. Like, there was no higher purpose, it was just total accident. And so those themes I really liked. Honestly, I was gonna say low-key mid earlier. This was the book I was alluding to, but I don't know, the way maybe I got a soft spot, maybe I'm getting soft, but I almost want to put Martyr as a good book. Trending on at times is definitely low-key mid, at times absolutely. However, I know people love this book, so again, let me know your thoughts in the comments about Martyr, and without further ado, let's get to the next book. Alright, and now that we got the Dewey spark back up, let's do the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu, ancient Chinese mystic text that was written kind of like in verse form, and there's all these little kind of aphorism, little nuggets of wisdom to kind of chew on. Some of them are better than others. That's kind of like honestly all the mystic verse text to me. I wouldn't quite put it at great ass book, but it's definitely at least, you know, a good book, trending on great ass book. And it might just need me, I might need to reread it and kind of really let it fully sink in, because that's how these work. There's these relatively short verses, but they are, you know, packed with wisdom. Not all of them, but like, you know, the best of the best. And so for that reason, I'm gonna put it as it's a good book. Okay, and up next, it looks like we got a study in Scarlet. I'm looking at it right here. A Study in Scarlet by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. This, of course, is the story of Sherlock Holmes, and this, if I'm not mistaken, is in fact the first book of the series. This is where we first meet Sherlock and we get to understand his character, which of course I love, and which I realized so many characters are based off of, like so many different crime mystery shows. It is like to a T the character of Sherlock, like this super hyper deductive, logical, observant, savant brain person who's also like kind of like socially inept, but just the way that they're able to draw conclusions from such a little amount of data and observation. Again, that is Sherlock, and you see its influence, of course, until today. So I think when it was like the detective Sherlock, and of course the dynamic between him and Watson, like both of those are actual characters, and their relationship is, you know, part of what makes the book great, like their dialogue and their banter. I loved all of that stuff, but at some point in this book, at like the height of suspense, it cuts to like the most long, totally seemingly unrelated flashback and tells this whole story that leads back up, basically relating to why all the mysteries of this, because this definitely is at its heart a mystery crime story. But we get this whole backstory, which just was absolutely painful for me to read. Like, I started and I was loving it so much, I was just eating it up, but at some point the backstory hit and I just remember totally losing my momentum. But anyway, overall, I do feel like I'm gonna put it as a good book. I think that evens out. It was between great ass and also low-key mid. So just so you know, not all good books are, some are consistently good, some average out to be good. And that's what we have with A Study in Scarlet. So let's get up to our next book. Let's do it. We see it right here. It's staring us right in the face. The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich by William Shirer. This, of course, is a top book of the year. The way that he is able to, for me, the word that comes to mind here is breadth. Like, he is able to talk about from the birth and through his adolescent and young adulthood all the way to his rise in power. You get the full story of Hitler, as well as so many different personalities, like all his little underlings and people like that. You really get to come to understand their personalities. But he's also describing, almost like in a more, not like textbook fashion, but like the major geopolitical shifts that were happening throughout the world during Hitler's rise to power in Nazi Germany. Like, this dude was taking over countries like boom, bam, like the borders of Europe for a while there were being completely rewritten. So you also get to understand like the actual high level historical perspective, and just even like the philosophy of history again. Like, how does someone like Hitler rise to power? In one sense, there were all these million coincidences that needed to happen. Like, that is one thing that really comes through the book. Like, basically how many times Hitler could have been stopped and how so many different parties and people just behaved in a way that was like completely incomprehensible. That is an actual phrase that William Shirer uses throughout the book to describe the actions of so many different countries and leaders and all the rest. So the history of it is fascinating. It does a deep dive also, of course, into the activities of the Holocaust and the conditions in concentration camps and stuff like that. So just all in all, even though it was 1,200 pages, I feel like it was consistently also written in a fairly entertaining way. Like history, when you look at it as a story, because of course in some very real sense history is nothing but a story, the story of societies and civilizations. And if you look at the story of Hitler and the Third Reich, well, let's just say it is a very fascinating one at which point I will also talk about in a formal book review. But let's do these last two real quick. We got Art and Fear. This was basically a book about the creative process of art, almost like not a self-help book. It's a book about the creative process itself. And this is kind of like my guilty pleasure. And honestly, I'm gonna put it as a good book. Like I feel like I read this, I had a deeper understanding of like what the creative process is. It got me inspired and got me, putting in some work. So, and it's just like this short little thing, but honestly, I really quite fucked with this. It's actually full. I'll almost be tempted to put it here, but for now, I'm gonna say it's a good book. And last but not least, we have Heraclitus. Kind of like with the Tao Te Ching, I'll even put them next to each other. It is a book of ancient Greek mystical verses. Heraclitus, for instance, is famous for saying, "You never step into the same river twice," because, of course, it's constantly in flux and changing. And there are a ton of bangers. Honestly, almost pound for pound, I feel like Heraclitus is kind of up there. But for now, I'm gonna be judicious and kind of put it feels around with the Tao Te Ching, but maybe I need to reread and think on these. But all right, what do you guys think of my measly 15 books for 2025? You may notice the bottom part is totally blank. That might be me just not being harsh enough, but also I feel like I make a point to only, like, I'm not reading mid shit. I will DNF that so fast. That would have been Moby Dick, but I persisted and, again, it averaged out where it did. But I'm not one to read a mid book. The closest we got was like Martyr. Like if I wanted to be mean, I would do this, and in fact, that could be the right placement on any given day. So here, you know what? I'll leave it just for fun. But yeah, you'll never catch me reading ass. And oh my goodness, would you believe it? I forgot to talk about the books that I am currently reading: The Secret History by Donna Tartt, as well as Selected Writings by Rumi. And I want to start with, of all things, The Secret History by Donna Tartt. It's a book I've seen floating around for a while. I've heard nothing but good things, but you know me, I'm not really much of a contemporary reader. I was a little skeptical. At some point, we picked it up from Goodwill, of course. We saw that. We had to cop. But what really did it for me was my girlfriend, a reliable, trusted source. She read this and she just fell absolutely in love with it. It got a coveted 5 stars from Raina, which is not easy to do. So that already immediately piqued my interest. So once I finished Moby Dick, I wanted something light. I wanted something fun, and just kind of was drawn to spontaneously pick this up. And boy, am I glad I did. I'm like 250, probably actually I think 300 pages into this, and so far I have just been thoroughly, unabashedly enjoying this book. For one, just the actual story, like the beginning, the very first chapter, and I won't even spoil it, but this, crazy thing happens, en media res, as we've been bringing up lately on the channel. We're introduced to the main character and we follow this thread, and you're introduced to the very people and things that are going to take place, and even as it's all unfolding in your eyes and you know what's going to happen, you're just like, how could it possibly end up going there? I feel like this is just a good example of a really well-written story, at least so far. The ending will be important, but you also really come to love the characters. And one thing about them and about this story in general is how much of a role the aesthetics play of it, like the dark academia tweed suits and the white pressed shirt and the tie and the boots and the loafers. And as you can see, I low-key been inspired, but also just throughout it, like it's very much a college novel too. Like they all live like walking distance within one another, like through various dorms and things like that on campus. So they're constantly just like dropping in on one another unannounced at crazy hours in the night, staying up super late, sometimes till the sun comes up. They're drinking scotch, they're drinking espresso, they got their cigarette. The whole thing is just like a vibe. And that sounds corny, but honestly, I have at least so far been thoroughly enjoying it. Clearly, bro, I turned a whole new leaf and everything. But tell me what you guys think in the comments. And before we go, let's talk about Selected Writings by Rumi. So Rumi is another one of the ancient mystics, this time in the region of the world of Persia, and it absolutely shows in the poetry. Like, just some things I wrote down that, like, animals and symbols and things that he kind of uses as metaphors in his poetry, like camels, elephants, donkeys, dates, sugar cane, the reed, that one's big. There's just, like, you know, all these different kind of things that are local to his Persian culture, and I love seeing that part. And on top of that, Rumi has some bangers that can hang with the best of them. He's up there with Lao Tzu and Heraclitus, if you ask me. And something unique to Rumi is the fact that I feel like throughout this book he's very sensual. Like, he's kind of constantly drinking wine. He talks about, like, making love and having sex and, like, pleasures of that sort, how they can actually be. And this leads almost to, like, some Dorian Gray, Henry Beckett and stuff, where sometimes even through the base worldly pleasures, you can find some element of spirituality. For instance, Rumi also said he smoked hashish. If I looked it up, and if it is what I think it is, we are definitely smoking this one for Rumi. And with that, let's go ahead and close the video out and get right back to it. All right, and with that, we wrap up my year of reading for 2025. I'm gonna do a video for my goals and aspirations for 2026 for the upcoming new year. So stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, let me know what you thought of these books. Drop any thoughts, comments below. You guys already know what to do. If you haven't subscribed, that's crazy. You need to do that. Follow me on Instagram at Big Nate's Book Reviews. Follow me on GOODREADS. We got links in the description. Get to the budding Big Nate Discord. It's crazy that some people aren't there as well to me. And so without further ado, thank you so much for watching Big Nate's Book Reviews, home of the best book reviews.